Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Bill Schaninger, who is the Senior Partner Emeritus at McKinsey. I should say co-author of Power to the Middle. Here I am doing my game show. Excellent book. I've actually read it, the PDF. So, Bill, first of all, welcome. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
And you know, I hear the word middle, talk about middle managers. I myself am a middle manager, and sometimes it feels a little bit like you're on Dunder Mifflin, and it's just kind of meh. You know, is that like not to? Is that part of the problem we're dealing with here? Is how we perceive ourselves and how others perceive us?
Well, it's certainly how people perceive Scranton, PA.
Yes. Well, I mean, look, no offense to our current president, but
No.
you know.
No, there was a wonderful and no shortage of merch that relates to Dunder Mifflin and Scranton.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I think like shows like The Office, whether it's the Ricky Gervais version or the Steve Carell version, or
Ricky Gervais version is better.
I think it was.
Baseline.
I think it was. Yeah, but I'm clearly I'm impacted by having lived in London for 4 years.
Okay.
When it was on.
Okay.
But this idea of the portrayal of the middle manager as a dolt, or a product of the machine, or someone who's there to give good meeting.
A victim of bureaucracy and a symptom of bureaucracy at the same time.
100%. Both.
Yeah.
Almost always both. Sometimes they'll be portrayed as having a good heart, but just completely incompetent.
Yeah.
And they were parked there. Dilbert cartoons, Office Space. I mean, the entirety, the idea that the meme of TPS reports still goes on tells you something.
That's what unites Elon Musk, and Mark Zuckerberg have both complained publicly in the past year about middle managers. Like, that's their problem. So let's use that as the baseline as to why this book exists, because it really is a testament to the power of the middle manager, but also, I think, analyzes why middle managers aren't often or always that effective.
For sure, it's a baseline of perception. I mean, no doubt about it. And in some cases, probably well-deserved, really, if you think about the, at least in my case, the earliest days of this book, there was going to be a front end of this book, which was a little bit more historical. And saying
really, the history of the middle manager?
A little bit of how did we get here? Now it's down to a chapter here. I wanted to do basically a two-parter. Our friends at Harvard were kind enough to say, we actually think it's 2 books, Bill. We'd be interested in both. My McKinsey colleagues were...
Let's do this book first, and then we'll see,
right,
kind of thing.
My McKinsey colleagues were less interested in the how did we get here.
Yeah.
Because there's a little bit of, if you look at, let's say, the run from 1990 till now, and so I was, in the second half of undergrad in 1990, re-engineering, right-sizing, Bethlehem Steel going cold, Mack Trucks moving away, Lucent losing a majority of its value.
Yep.
Right, you look at all these places, IBM going up and down, AT&T going up and down. All these places were historically GM going through its travails, Chrysler careening towards, or coming out of...
But GE and Jack Welch.
100%. That was on the era of the GM.
Triumph of the manager.
Rising up. Bossity was still around at that point. So you had this thing of, you had the iconic CEO, well, at the same time as a lot of institutions, Chainsaw Al didn't come to prominence. Al Dunlop didn't come to prominence for nothing.
The guy who would shoot rattlesnakes, that guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, and had some interesting approaches to accounting.
Yeah.
But the idea that the middle had gotten so bloated, largely going all the way back to a Sloan era view of GM, which was duplicate business units, fat everywhere, and it was laid at the feet of the people in the middle, right? I think the challenge is, for a long time, that was in an era where you needed individuals to carry the message. Memos were still a thing, written word. But as we went through the 90s and the interaction cost of communication nosedived, then you started saying, well, why do we need these people?
Why do we need an executive assistant? Why do we need a middle manager? And
that's right.
And there's some logic to that, because that's a significant cost.
For sure.
But what was the collateral damage?
Well, maybe more of the hidden things that we missed out on. I mean, for sure, and with all due respect to my former competitors at some other consultancies, the idea of you can rationalize all structure down to 6 by 6.
Okay.
Span of control of 6 and layer 6.
Yeah.
It's just absurd.
Right.
Right. The work that people do, you are a skilled professional. You actually you know what you do and what the people who work for you do. You could still even do some of it yourself, putting a package together, saying, hey, we have to put the top on here. There's likely still a bit of your job that's you doing the craft.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. General counsels are the same way. Giving you a direct reports of 20 might be a mistake. if you're
So
ever,
you're talking like I know we're getting into management, but it seems Peter Principle, this idea of getting outside of one's area of expertise, is that the problem
well,
with
the
middle management?
yeah, for sure. One is you take the individual contributor and you make them a manager and do nothing for them, and
Right.
they just can't. That's
Yeah.
one. That was not what I was getting at for you. In your case, I was saying you are good at building teams. You've done it across institutions, but you still have a skill set.
Right.
In which case, giving you a span that's so big that doesn't allow you to still use your skill set would be a mistake.
Right.
You know, one of the examples we have in here of people saying their purpose was still achieved by doing the work they wanted to do, and they wanted to help people. For other people, that with all the joy of their work went away because they were doing budgets. And I think the challenge for middle managers is we homogenized many of them because it was convenient for cost cutting.
Yeah.
And we started just loading them up with forms and meetings and ever increasing
So they
spans.
became the master of admin as opposed to
and
the
dealing with the
master
bad
of their-
actors, right? They're
Yeah.
the ones dealing with the problem children, not actually get to doing it. And for sure, you know, if Jim Harder and the folks at you know, at Gallup are to be believed and others, maybe a third of them really aren't ever going to be up to it.
So,
you know, and so there you'd say, let's find something useful for them to do.
So
not keep them.
I want to step back a second to 30,000 foot, because you really are an expert on culture, values, leadership. That's what you were known for, are known for, you know, but at McKinsey. And when did this come on your radar screen in terms of, okay, this motif of the middle manager being a consistent problem? Because you get into rooms we don't get to go. Was it something you kept seeing as a problem?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, kind of always
Okay.
in my client work was always there. From a publishing and research standpoint, maybe about 5 years ago when I took up the future of work stuff, you know, I had been the global knowledge leader of the org practice, had run global talent, started people analytics. But, you know, it was just the way rotations work in leadership. There was like, what's the next new thing going to be? And I started doing the future of work stuff. And that at that point, you know, 5 years ago, we were saying, well, what's going to be left after automation hits?
Right.
You know, when then it was machine learning, even before, you know, generative AI. And we broke it up simply, just as we do, break it up into three things. Say, hey, there's the work and how is the work changing. There's the workforce. What skills do they need? What do we have? And we were doing this a decade ago with analytics.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
And the workplace. What kind of workplace would really be attractive to people and get the best out of them, particularly whether they're working in teams or individual. The thing that was interesting was the answer was almost always the yeah, but here's the problem. It was always the same. Well, how is the work changing? Well, the person leading the team will know that. You know, it's
Well, people quit their boss, right? They don't quit their
100%.
job. And
100%.
what's interesting, so that knowing that the pandemic comes 2 years in or whatever to this role, how did that change things?
I think it massively accelerated it, for sure.
Because we're all working from our bedrooms and it became tougher?
Well, I mean, if you were to go across the three, just think about things that we would have never accepted. Would we have ever accepted going to a hotel? First off, we weren't allowed to go to hotels.
Right.
But when we could go to hotels, we'd accept not having the sheets changed, right, where it cleaned every day. Would you ever think of driving to a Best Buy or driving to a retail store and not going inside?
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
Would you go to a restaurant where they're understaffed and now they want you to order the incredibly expensive bottle of wine off an iPad? Mm-hmm. I mean, we've had real changes, and I think we're ebbing and flowing back to what's going to stick for us versus not, around service, around products, etc. The person who's supposed to be the conduit to figuring out how the strategy is supposed to be delivered, the brand promise delivered to the customers, is the manager and their directs and the teams. Well, suddenly that person got the shining light on them and going, do you actually know what your team's doing?
Yeah.
Do you know what the customer wants? And it just accelerated all of it.
Well, and so the Great Resignation, was that a misnomer? I mean, because so many people did quit, especially women, how much of that was a factor of the middle manager? How much was and there's so much existential angst there that it's hard to know how that impacted that critical role.
Well, it's at least a big part of it. I mean, you know, my former colleague Aaron DeSmet and I led a lot of our work on great attrition and great attraction. And we're looking at this. And if I were to say things that really jumped out, when we asked employees while they were leaving, it's things like, I want to be respected. The work has to advance my own sense of purpose.
My
Right?
kids are going to school in the next room. There's that.
Well, and there's good old-fashioned flexibility, but now the expanded version of flexibility. What the work is being done, how it's being done, when it's being done, where it's being done, and with whom it's being done with, right? Expanded. It's not just, oh, I want to come in at a later time. Leaders broadly broke into two camps. There were those who very quickly figured out and had the natural wherewithal to say, I just want to check in on how you're doing.
Yeah.
Remember that run of like 9-12 months where it was like ERPs that had never been used before were suddenly exploding with, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, am I ever going to get out of this little studio apartment? This is overwhelming, my kids are here, my partner's here. There were some who got it and said the person first have to be taken care of. Mm-hmm. There were others who were like, well, I don't talk about that. That's not my job. And so very quickly you had a line in the sand of bosses who care about me as a person versus bosses who do not. I think that was the first one that really came. You saw people running away from that. When the attrition stuff, and at any given point, about broad numbers, 40%, at any given point, like we were having 40% churn, 2/3 were always saying they were going to leave, and of those 2/3, they were saying, by the way, I'll leave without another job.
Right.
And when you really honed in on it, it was all the social factors. It was not the economic factors. You know, many companies like to point the finger and say, my competitors they're not being very smart. They're being, poor use of judgment with how they're elevating salaries. And these people are just chasing the buck. But when you ask the employees, it was all good boss, good team, good work, good company that looks after me.
Yeah.
These people over here didn't want to look in the mirror. It's like, no, they're running away from you.
They're quitting you.
They're quitting you.
And let's take us to circa, 2023, where we are today. There's so much pressure to cut costs. You mentioned generative AI, which of course is going to have an impact on the workforce, and yet the skill set to be an excellent middle manager seems like we haven't necessarily had the same amount of training in the past
not
few
even
years.
close.
So what is the answer? What's the key message? Let's talk first to employers. What is the key takeaway that you want them to get from this book? First, buy it. We're not going to tell you everything, but
and if they get the Audible version, they'll hear me.
Oh, good.
Which apparently is a good sleep aid. That's as I'm told by my daughter and stepdaughter.
As is Martha Stewart, and she did okay. So I think soothing voices work.
When we were first really trying to put this together and say, well, what should they do about it? A good portion was maybe we could just revisit what it means to be a middle manager and the relative emphasis on where they spend their time. And so we asked, nearly 1,000 of them, I think was the basis, and say, well, what should you spend your time on? This is a global
study you did.
Right. What should you spend your time on? And funny enough, it looked a whole lot like meetings and planning. What would really help? And that looked a whole lot like, well, enough planning, but a whole lot more time with people. And what are you rewarded for? And people wasn't on that at all. And it's this idea of, you have for like mechanics, you say time on tools. We were saying, where's the time on talent?
I was seeing the stats, and it was bureaucracy was their number one complaint, right, of middle managers. And what do they want? They want more autonomy. Is that illogical? Is that reasonable? What we want, what we need?
A little bit of autonomy can go a long way. I don't think it should ever be a free-for-all.
Right.
We have 1,000 flowers blooming. But we used to talk about what does role clarity really mean. Simple role clarity is, here's what good looks like, by when, with whom, here's what you decide on your own, here's what you have to come back and ask me about. If you were to make sure that every person who got asked to do something had that, there's a pretty wide swath there for people to work in. I think they're asking for that. It's when it's things like 3 different teams are working on the same sort of thing. Oh, that's not what I wanted this. Where like their time and their attention, their efforts are treated cavalierly. I think that's an issue. And for me, it almost starts at a root of this whole swath of the middle is treated with some level of disrespect and a real lack of care. So you're saying, hey, what do we actually do? I think the first one is revisit the job.
Maybe rebrand the job. I talked about middle manager. I mean, it's not a term that makes the spirit soar.
No,
that way?
No, it's not. I mean, it's one of those, long ago when we wrote the Organizational Health Index, I would have called it culture had we been allowed. But in 2002, that wasn't an option.
So now we could rebrand it. You mentioned something called the Great Rebundling. What is that?
Well, for sure, there's an idea. If you look at work and you pull work apart into its component pieces, you say, well, that we're just not going to do anymore. Like good classic cost cutting starts with pulling the activities apart and saying,
where are we wasting our time?
Where are we just doing stuff that nobody cares about?
Yeah.
Let's lower the volume, lower the variability, reduce the handoffs. Actually, we're just not going to do that. Okay, now you add in what can be done by a machine, what can be done by technology, what's left for the humans. Of what's left for the humans, what does anyone want to pay for?
Yep.
Got it? Put those back together. Pull apart, change, put it back together.
Are there fewer managers in that scenario?
I'm not sure, and it's an unhelpful, it depends. In places where the work that your unit does is quite variable, and the skill level of the people is quite variable, you probably need significantly smaller spans of control. That would suggest more managers. In places where it's super homogenous, well-known, the tasks are well-known, you've routinized all of it.
More direct reports.
You can probably go bigger.
More inspirational leadership,
And
less
then it's,
hands-on.
yes, as Brian likes to say, Brian, one of the co-authors, the dull and the dangerous. There's a lot of stuff that's repetitive that actually is dangerous.
Yep.
And so there, your charisma, your esprit de corps, what you really try to bring out in the team matters way more. And you need these people desperately.
That's almost like the qualities you look for in a CEO. You're looking like mini-me almost for the CEO.
At a minimum, the translation part, where you think about how do we take this big 60,000-foot idea and bring it down to what does it mean for us, what does it mean for you? Job one.
So let's go back to the individual now, because individuals like myself, my dad was a middle manager and a great one as a sales manager. And what advice do you have for those individuals? Because middle management is a place you often want to get out of, right? It is an interim step to something else, which maybe is part of the problem you chronicle in the book.
Well, I'd say that is a huge part of the problem. For some people, their best purpose is to stay right where they are.
So give them more money and change the titles every few months?
Upgrade the title. If the organization, that the team they're leading has more value, pay them more, put more at risk, make them... In some parts, most of us, the human experience at work, want to feel like it's connected to what matters, that we're contributing, that we're supported, and we can have a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
We don't want to feel like it's random. We don't want to feel like it's chance. We want the satisfaction of working hard at something and having it. The people who are good at helping people see that, experience it, worth their weight in gold.
Great.
Right? And that's... So to me, there's something here about... And in fact, we detail this at some... One of the... There's a story in there for Kelsey, right? The person who took the job and then the person who didn't. The person who took the job, the case was Kelsey. It was about a for-profit education center.
Yeah.
That's actually my longtime partner, Becky Kepner.
Okay.
Right, and then she worked at a for-profit
No
place.
longer anonymous in the book.
That's okay. She's all right with it. In fact, we called the lady who helped us with the writing, who wasn't an author, saying, Becky said to her, "I've never felt so heard."
Okay, well that's good.
So well done,
that's
Phyllis.
Good.
Shout out to you. But I think this idea of, for some people, and here we use the example of running the centers, you put him even 1 degree of freedom away from the action, it just doesn't have the juice.
Yeah.
And that juice is what has them working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. It has them there. I mean, I've said I even told you this one time. My first job when I left Moravian was at a place called Kids Peace, National Centers for Kids in Crisis. And I was hired to run a unit. It was anywhere from an 18 to 25 bed unit, depending on it. And the guy who hired me walked me out of his office and pointed up to the building and said, "See that building? It's yours. All the kids in there, yours. The staff, yours. What happens there, yours. Whether you're here or not, it's yours. Do you understand?"
That's a very powerful message.
It was amazing. I think they were paying me something like $16,500 a year.
Yep.
Right? And I'd had done it for nothing, or nearly nothing.
No, I think it's a testament to your point to the power of impact, and what bigger impact can you have than the lives and careers of other people. So the book, Power to the Middle, we're speaking with Bill Schaninger, and I hope you buy it. It's a great book. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.